All your base are belong to us.
Hello, and welcome to Fake Geek Girls, a podcast looking at nerdy pop culture from both a fan and critical perspective, encouraging the things we love to do better. I'm Missy, I'm a writer, and boy howdy, are we going through it.
I'm Mary, I'm a marketer, and my dog tried to die.
Yep.
He didn't.
He didn't die.
He's alive and fine. Don't ever let your dog eat bones, specifically cooked pork bones.
Yeah.
They'll get blockages.
We've had a time in the past.
We almost didn't make it today.
We almost didn't make it today.
So, like, we usually record around 11, and it's 5.
Yeah, it's 5. Yeah, we've been having some things happen. So thank you for your patience. The great news is that I finished this outline 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
The bad news is that I finished this outline 2 weeks ago. So I'm on as much of a journey as you are to hear what I think about Poor Things.
Your opinions might even have changed.
Yeah, God only knows.
I know. I think that's what people I wish that would understand is that you change your opinion often.
Me specifically.
Yeah.
I do. I'm always thinking
You're
about
always
things.
evolving.
I'm like a Pokemon in many ways.
Yes.
When I see a rock, I evolve.
This is not how I was talking to my therapist today about how my mind is somehow discombobulated and blah blah blah, and she's like, I find that so interesting since you say you like to talk about philosophy and deeper things with your friends. I'm like, that is a completely different muscle. That's a totally different muscle.
You can feed multitudes.
You can think non-linearly with philosophy. In fact, maybe you should. So think of it that way. We're just doing things non-linearly.
Yeah. Today we're talking about Poor Things, but when we're talking about Poor Things, we're talking about two different media with two different takes on the material.
And two different endings.
And two completely different endings. So I'm going to sum them up. I'm going to sum them up chronologically and then sort of add in the bits that are different enough to be worth commenting on. That means that I am going to lead with spoilers. So if you started listening to this without knowing that I'm going to spoil the hell out of both the novel and the film Poor Things, this is your last warning. I am going to spoil them, and I am going to spoil them now.
Dead men tell no tales. That's like the ominous, before you get on Pirates, leave.
Yeah, get the fuck out.
But they don't play that until you're on the boat.
They don't warn you until it's too late.
Yeah.
Before the events of Poor Things, Victoria, a poor Scottish woman, marries a general named Aubrey Blessington. She is unhappy in her marriage and dies by suicide along with her unborn baby.
You don't find that out till halfway through.
That's why I said I'm going to spoil right off the bat here because it was easiest to talk about this chronologically.
Yeah, it is.
Her body is retrieved by Godwin Baxter, a scientist and doctor who removes Victoria's brain and swaps it with that of her unborn baby before bringing the body back to life. He raises Victoria, now Bella, watching how quickly her mind grows to match her body. Eventually, he introduces Archie McCandless, or also known as Max McCandles, changed for reasons I cannot explain. He introduces McCandless or McCandles to Bella. I'm probably going to say McCandles just for ease. I'll try to be specific. Mr. Candy, as he's known. The Candyman. He's introduced to Bella, and he falls in love with her as they get to know one another. With Bella still seeming much like a child, Max asks her to marry him. Bella agrees, but first leaves on a round-the-world trip with Duncan Wedderburn, a scoundrel lawyer who falls in love with Bella to the point that it literally drives him insane. At one point when I was reading this novel, I said, you could sum up the whole Duncan Wedderburn saga as pussy so good it turned a man Catholic.
The least interesting, most interesting person.
Truly. What a performance of a lifetime by Mark Ruffalo. On this trip, Bella grows more into maturity and has a lot of sex with Wedderburn to begin with, and meets a variety of people who challenge her perceptions both positively and negatively. She's confronted with the horror of class disparity and learns that she has a cesarean section scar, meaning that at some point she was pregnant, but she doesn't know what happened to that baby.
I got one of those. But I do know what happened to the baby.
You do know what happened to the baby. Bella and Wedderburn end up in Paris, where Bella works as a sex worker for some time before leaving due to unfair labor practices on the part of the madame. She returns to Glasgow and agrees to marry Max, but the ceremony is interrupted by the arrival of Wedderburn and Blessington, who claims that the marriage cannot take place because she is already married to Blessington. After a series of events that differ between the book and the movie, Bella shoots Blessington and is free for him, whether to marry Archie and become a doctor or to be with her partner Toinette and to study to become a doctor. However, the novel has a very important additional section.
Like, totally a weird thing to take out.
Yeah. In this additional section, Victoria claims that Archie McCandless's narrative of her brain being swapped with her unborn babies is false, and she recounts her own life afterward, which she spent pursuing socialism and the improvement of people in Glasgow. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is socialism and the history of Scotland, which, if you've only seen the movie, are going to sound radically out of left field.
Yeah.
That's because they are absolutely essential to the book, but were largely left out of the movie. Though there are passing references to socialism in the film, it's background noise to Bella's development, and her origins in Glasgow are exchanged for a London background for the film.
Some weird changes.
Yeah.
One of my favorite parts is when Wedderburn finds her and is crazy, and she says that they are the owners of their own production, which is when she was working for Ladies of the Night. And I thought, that's true.
Yeah. So reportedly, director Yorgos Lanthimos said that he didn't feel qualified to adapt Alasdair Gray's commentary on the history of Scotland, which we'll get into shortly. Whether or not you think this hurts the adaptation is something we'll discuss later. Not you, like the listener, but like we'll talk about the idea of this as an adaptation later. But I wanted to bring it up here because leaving it out wasn't an accidental oversight, but a conscious choice. Like they
it'd have to be.
Yeah, he made the conscious choice to say, actually, we're not going to talk about Glasgow here. So, with that in mind, what is the film missing? So Gray, the author, Alasdair Gray, was a Scottish writer. He died in 2019 before the movie came out, though he did give Lanthimos his blessing to make the film. And Gray, centered Scotland in his writing, and Glasgow in particular. In fact, much of Poor Things can be said to be a sort of retelling and aspiration for the future of Scotland, which has been tugged between identities for much of its life as part of the United Kingdom seeking independence. The history of Scotland is too long to recount here, and there's a lot to talk about in a way that's different from the Derry Girls episode where we talked about the history of the Troubles. But it is worth reading more about it, as it will make Poor Things even more interesting to you. I definitely recommend it. This is a quote from Making Up for Lost Time, Scotland's Stories and the Self in Alasdair Gray's Poor Things, which is by Donald P. Kazvinsky. I apologize for my pronunciation. And he writes, Bella is what the Victorians most feared in a wife, the sexually liberated woman who feels no shame or guilt about her erotic self. She refuses to be tamed. The critique of the quote-unquote feminine by the male characters is an English critique of Scotland as well. Scotland, like Bella, was supposed to be chaste and demure, the perfect helpmate. The English did not mind paying to experience a little passion, as Blessington did not mind going to a whore, or Londoners did not mind vacationing in the Highlands, but they did not expect those same emotions to influence their sober domestic policies. The wedding of the two nations was an arranged marriage, established out of political convenience rather than any genuine love or affection. But England found Scotland an unruly and rebellious partner who refused to accept the strictures and restraints imposed by her spouse. So this passage could fit into the feminism section as well. Everything in this book, like all of these themes overlap and intersect with one another.
Which was what made it such a great book.
Yeah, exactly. So this passage could fit into the feminism section as well, but this essay in particular is great at explaining the connection between Bella and Scotland. Any critiques made of her by the people in the story are also, in a sense, critiques the English make or have made of Scotland. It's made explicit in the portrait of Bella in the middle of the book, where she's identified as Bella Caledonia, with Caledonia being the historic name for a large portion of Scotland. Bella is Bella, but she's also Caledonia, and she's also Victoria. All of these unruly, unpredictable things to the English imagination. So if you're curious about how this metaphor works, I definitely recommend this essay, which there will be a link to in the show notes, to kind of understand the way that Scotland and Glasgow in particular are represented within the novel. At first, it might seem odd to have put this under the socialism header, but this connection between Bella and Scotland is not just a metaphor, but a very real and concrete vision Gray had for the novel. Gray was an outspoken socialist and proponent of Scottish independence and coined the phrase, quote, work as if you live in the early days of a better nation, unquote, which actually became part of opposition to Thatcherism in the 80s and 90s, which would have impacted Scotland as well. Scottish independence and socialism are not necessarily the same thing, and socialism is not necessarily tied to a sort of optimism for the future. But in the case of Gray, all three of these things are tied together. Scotland/Bella may have a history of control by the English/patriarchy, but there is a liberated future waiting to be created. So this is a quote from Insatiable Curiosity, The Real Politics of Poor Things by Mike Small, which is actually from an outlet called Bella Caledonia, which is based on some of the themes of Poor Things and is, I think it's like a left sort of online magazine about Scotland. So this is from that essay by Small. In Gray's book, he draws on and plays with 19th century literary and anarchist political history to create the novel's backstory. It's quite clear. William Godwin was the father of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, author of Frankenstein of the Modern Prometheus, 1818, wife and editor of the Romantic poet and philosopher Percy Bysshe. I don't know how to say his middle name. I'm sorry to all the romantics out there. Percy Bysshe Shelley. Mary's mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, died 11 days after giving birth. Her surviving daughter was raised by her father, William Godwin, who home-educated her, encouraging her to adhere to his own anarchist political theories.
Mary Wollstonecraft, the mother, is one of my favorite historical characters. She's cool as hell. Go look her up.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is kind of like... When you read this, you're kind of like, yeah, okay. So there's a couple of connections here. Poor Things is a sort of Frankenstein story, right? We'll talk more about Frankenstein later, but like you just look at it and you're like, yeah, it's kind of like Frankenstein.
I know. I told my husband, I was like, oh, I gotta watch Poor Things. He goes, oh, is that Frankenstein movie?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, kind of.
Frankenstein was written by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, whose mother was a famous feminist and her father was an anarchist. In Poor Things, our Frankenstein's monster, Bella, is created by a man whose name is similar to that of Mary Shelley's father. Instead of being Godwin Baxter, it's William Godwin. Gray is a very purposeful writer. I don't think these things are coincidences, and I think they're intentionally intertwined. Bella exists as a person, but also as a combined metaphor for Scotland, a specific woman, and women in general, and the progressive ideals of socialism. Just as these things were inextricable for Gray, so too are they inextricable in the narrative of Poor Things. You just can't, they all exist together. They can't be pulled apart. This is a quote from Thought Poor Things Was Weird. The novel is too, in a good way, by Michael Dirda, who writes, Gray's subsequent novel, 1982 Janine, as well as Something Leather, again pushed literary boundaries, but this time by using erotic fantasies to critique social and societal norms. As a committed democratic socialist and opponent of modern-day corporations and conglomerates, Gray believed that, quote, the world is only improved by people who do ordinary jobs and refuse to be bullied, unquote. He regularly exhorted his readers to, quote, work as if you live in the early days of a better nation, unquote. Little wonder, then, that his 1992 monograph, Why Scots Should Rule Scotland, tracks the centuries-long history of how England and its ruling classes consistently denigrated and exploited Scotland. It ends, quote, I believe an independent country run by a government not much richer than the people has more hope than one governed by a big, rich neighbor, unquote. So we'll return to this idea of using sex to critique sexual and societal norms later. But again, this idea of Scotland and socialism and sex being intertwined is a recurring theme in Gray's work. Its absence in the film, the idea of Scotland, is, in my opinion, a missed opportunity. As many Scottish critics of the film point out, the idea of adaptation is something else that we'll talk about later. But before we get there, I want it to be clear that this isn't just sort of abstract reading of the story. This commentary is baked in, right?
And it's like, once you read just a little bit, it's kind of spoon-fed.
Yeah, he's not subtle.
It reminds me of George Romero.
Yeah, there's this like confrontation. There's this confrontational kind of attitude to it, you know? Not in a way that's like pointing at you and saying, God, you're stupid, but like it's like, hey, this
sucks, right?
Yeah, like pay attention.
What if we didn't?
Yeah. And we do see the idea of socialism throughout the book. Baxter remarks on the medical system, stating that if they really wanted to save lives, quote, they would unite to prevent diseases, not work separately to cure them, unquote. But Melissa, you say, and to me and also to Gray, how do we prevent diseases? Surely people just get sick sometimes. Sure. But as Gray, through Baxter, says, quote, fresh air, pure water, a good diet, and clean, roomy houses for everyone, and a total government ban on all work which poisons and prevents these things, unquote. How do we achieve these goals? Socialism. It's not the idea of eradicating diseases entirely, but it would certainly make prevention easier, right? If everybody had access to clean water, healthcare.
Then we wouldn't have the movie Aaron Brockovich.
But then we wouldn't have the movie Aaron Brockovich, and where would we be?
And where would we be in society?
Where would we be in society if we didn't have Aaron Brockovich, the movie?
Mm-hmm. And her, to be honest.
Baxter likewise critiques the way that Victorian society would force a woman like Victoria to live in, quote, thick-walled, understaffed, poorly equipped madhouses, reformatories, or jails. For in this Christian nation, suicide is treated as lunacy or crime, unquote. Again, this is an explicit critique of one of the things that capitalism and the social mores of our world make possible. What if we treated and prevented illness, both mental and physical, not as profit mines, but as a duty of our government, or as a duty we have to one another, right? Gray is forcing us, he's confronting us with these questions. And it's particularly interesting because it comes from a figure like Baxter, who is not, the Baxter of the film is very different from the Baxter of the book. Yeah. We'll talk more about that later, but the Baxter of the film is very likable, not least because he's played by Willem Dafoe, my favorite guy.
He's a silly little guy.
He's a silly little guy. And, but it is really interesting in the book where Godwin is much more of a gray, morally gray figure, to have him asking these confrontational questions. Instead, as Bella observes from talking with characters like the Russian man, Dr. Hooker, and Harry Astley, we shift the responsibility for social issues onto the individual, right? It is a failing of the individual when they get sick. It is a failing of the individual when they are poor. We fix these things on an individual level, or we shift the responsibility to charity or to the church. One of my favorite passages in the book was this one. And this is Bella writing in a letter to Godwin and McCandless. Dr. Hooker has left the boat in Morocco without saying goodbye or asking for his New Testament. He lent it to me so I could find peace in Jesus, but there is none. Jesus was as maddened by all-over cruelty and coldness as I am. He too must have hated discovering he had to make people better all by himself. He had one advantage over me. He could do miracles. I asked Dr. Hooker how Jesus would have treated my starving little daughter with the blind baby. Jesus made the blind to see, said poor Dr. Hooker, looking uncomfortable. What would Jesus have done for them if he could not have made them see? I asked. Would he have hurried past like a bad Samaritan? Bella is essentially asking, okay, but what if we can't perform miracles? What if these problems continue to exist? How do we address these things? Do we simply ignore that they are occurring and hope that somebody else, like Jesus maybe, takes care of it? Bella lives the doctrine that Gray coined, work as if you live in the early days of a better nation. Bella believes that she does, right? Like, that's something that Bella has on us, is that she really believes she lives in the early days of a better nation.
Well, I think, too, with the way that she grew up being like, confined and, like, not confined, but almost, like, sheltered.
Sheltered, for sure.
She was sheltered and given these optimistic views. It makes it easy for her to be that way.
When you're not raised in a society that says this is the way things are, when you see the way that things are, you can go, hey, that's fucked up, actually. Well, what if we did something different?
Yeah, and like when you're not raised in a situation where like, well, it's fucked anyway, so who cares? Which is what a lot of people kind of now have a hard time with.
Right.
Because when you give up faith, you give up optimism.
Yes.
And I think that's what part of the reason this book I think is so great is that Bella lives in a fucked up time, but she's still really optimistic. But part of that optimism was growing up in a world which she was able to believe in optimism.
Yeah, she has, when you look at the Bella of the film and the Bella that's portrayed through the majority of the book, Poor Things, this is a Bella who never saw the world as it is. She lived this very sheltered upbringing. Even Victoria, who did see the world as it is, still chooses to make her difference, right?
Yeah.
She sees the world as it is and says, but it can be different, and I will make it different in whatever way that I can. That's one of the more powerful things about the novel to me, is that you have Bella, essentially, what's the phrase that I'm looking for? I don't remember. She's coming at the world from this perspective of not being raised in it as natural or normal. So when she sees something horrific, she says, that's horrific and that shouldn't be happening. Victoria, on the other hand, was raised in this world, was raised in poverty, and still looks at the world and says, hey, that's fucked up. Let's do something about it. That's a really powerful thing, because it is hard, right? To be raised in the world and to look around and be like, yeah, it's fucked up, but this is the only way it can be. Yeah. Victoria in the novel tells us that's not true.
And that's what makes her such a great doctor.
Yeah, absolutely.
When she's talking about like birth and things like that, like as someone who recently has given birth, it was really refreshing. Yeah. And the fact that she was shunned for a lot of the way, like simply that the best way to give birth is not on your back is like, and the fact that she was like told like, shut up, is like, that's a real conversation that is still to be had.
One of my favorite parts was, it's very, very close to the end of the novel, like very, very close. It's talking about the clinic that she runs, and I think it's when Alasdair Gray is kind of writing a in character as editor Alasdair Gray is sort of writing this explanation of what her clinic was like, and there's a note, there's like a donation box, and there's a note on it that says, if you're hungry, please don't steal from this box, just talk to me. Hunger is curable.
Yeah.
And like that, just that phrase, hunger is curable, is such a like that shouldn't hit the way it does.
It makes me mad.
Right? Yeah.
Like, it makes me mad. It makes me mad, like, in conversation where she's talking about, like, reproductive rights and how people fight for reproductive rights still, and people still want to take away children's ability to eat in schools. Yeah. Like, it makes me angry.
The truth of the statement, hunger is curable, is just so
it's almost
powerful.
Shocking.
Yeah, right? Because, like, when we, again, you know, when you're raised in this society, you just kind of take for granted that some people are hungry. And that's bullshit.
And not only that you take for granted, some people put a moral blame on them.
Exactly, yeah.
They put a moral... This is where I believe this individual, and not collective mentality that America has is really damaging.
Yeah.
Like, there are people who get really angry that you have to buy school supplies for other kids in the class. And like, are you angry that you should buy school supplies? Why aren't you angry at the fact that we have to buy them in general?
Right.
Because people don't want to buy things for other children. That's why people are angry.
Yeah.
And that's fucked up. And those people can go fucking jump in a ditch.
Yeah. And like all these people who are trying to take away free lunches and stuff like that. It's just like, what did these children do to you? You know, like, hunger is curable. Yeah. We can fix it anytime we want. Look how much fucking food is on the store on the shelves at the grocery store.
This book is a great like you don't believe in socialism. Well, you should read this book because I think you might.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, a lot of people do agree with socialism. They just don't know it.
They don't know the name. You know, they associate it with a lot of negative things. But I think more people need to understand the fundamentals of what's happening in these kinds of arguments.
A lot of people just need to understand fundamentals in general.
Yeah. So there's another, this is just, it's not a quote, but in Making Up for Lost Time, Scotland's Stories and the Self, and Alasdair Gray's Poor Things, Donald P. Kazvinsky, right. He talks about like drawing comparisons between the argument that the poor must exist to further the British cause and Blessington's treatment of Dolly, who was this woman that he was cheating on Victoria with, and says that like he had to treat Dolly poorly for the sanctity of marriage, which is also the way that the poor are talked about. I think it's Henry Astley who talks about like we have to exploit the poor. Like it's a necessity, essentially. Again, Gray is drawing a deliberate comparison between how the English treat Scotland and how people treat women and how, you know, those who have treat poor people. I think there's something to be said about women's bodies being used as metaphors for political violence that maybe we could critique. Yeah. But I also think that Bella works as a character on her own as well as on a metaphorical level. Rather than saying women are just like countries or vice versa, it's suggesting that the attitude of exploitation stems as much from patriarchy as it does from imperialism and capitalism. Like it's essentially suggesting that all of these things come from the same contaminated source.
Well, I think too, that's why the end of this book is so important.
Yes.
Because it does take that critique and it's actually like, well, actually, maybe that was a little fucked up, huh?
Yeah. And the thing that's really powerful to me is like I said, it's not using Bella as a metaphor. Bella is also a person.
Yeah.
And it's saying essentially that the attitudes that enable imperialism, capitalism, exploitation, all of these kinds of things they all come from the same source. It's not just like all of them exist. They all come from the same idea of domination. All three are intertwined, just as the ideas of feminism and socialism are intertwined in Bella. Do you have anything else to say about the socialism part of the book?
Man, I sure wish we were a socialist country.
Sure thing.
I did try to this is only slightly the same. I tried to convince my dad that no government is good, and he didn't believe me. He goes, "You mean in like Switzerland and Finland and stuff, their government's bad?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Yeah, all government's bad, Dad. We should never be like, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
We should always be striving for better."
Just because they can be better than ours doesn't mean that they're good. You know?
He couldn't believe it. I was like, God, you really do watch too much CNN.
MSNBC pilled.
Yeah, he's MSNBC pilled.
Anyway, if you're curious about the socialism angle, you should really, really read the book. I loved the book. Like,
the book is great.
Adored it. I loved it. It was so good. Absolutely worth reading. And I think that if you're interested in the history of Scotland and the socialism stuff, like, definitely read it.
You need to read The Echo Wife. It's not exactly the same, but it could easily be like an adjacent other way of thinking.
I think I got The Echo.
Oh, so
I can't remember.
It's kind of like this, like a similar idea of looking at the world through women, but in like the more scientific.
Interesting.
Way. It's so fucking good. I thought about it as I was reading. I'm like, this is adjacent to that in a very different way. It's hard to explain.
So let's talk about feminism.
Let's talk about fem.
It doesn't really fit.
Same.
If you've listened to this podcast before, you've probably heard me talk about the fact that I personally, and I want to make it clear, this is I personally, don't call media feminist because I feel like feminism is a thing you do consciously, as in actions you take, and not just a thing that you can be passively.
I also say this, but only because Missy says it with so much vigor, and I don't have the words to fight her on it. I also don't have an opinion on it.
So before we get deep, hit the thingy.
Missy,
I'm so
down.
passionate.
God,
before we get deep,
so emotional.
I know.
You're hysterical.
But before we get deep into this discussion, I don't think Poor Things is feminist. But that's because my definition of feminism doesn't really apply to media.
But it sure did challenge me.
But, man, the book made me question myself for a moment. I found the section written by Victoria to be as compelling a case for a piece of media being feminist as I have found. Because it makes a really valid point. Why are we willing to believe the frankly ridiculous story of a Frankenstein woman rather than that a woman might invent herself and be independent, right? Now, on the one hand, because we are immersed in the fiction of reading a book, right? Okay, of course, it's easy to immerse yourself in the fiction of reading a book wherein a Frankenstein woman invents herself, you know? Okay, that's sick. I love that story.
The thing is, like, I also love that story.
I also love that story. But the
Clearly,
book,
we like the movie.
Yeah. But the book actually begins with an introduction from Alasdair Gray, who is both the actual author and a character. And the character Gray writes for himself is not a flattering portrayal. He tells us up front that the truth of the account is contested, but throws in his lot with McCandless rather than Victoria. So we have
It's
two.
such a good.
So good.
It's so good.
So we have two men right off the bat telling us a ridiculous story and a woman telling us one that sounds likely. And it is telling that the fictional Gray believes McCandless over Victoria. And frankly, it's telling that it's McCandless's story that is adapted into the film. So while I hold firm in my belief that feminist is not the right word for describing media, I appreciated the challenge that Victoria's section of the book presented for me by deliberately and clearly challenging men's narratives about women, especially because I too wanted to believe the fantastical story. When I got to the Victoria section, I was a little like, aw.
When I first got to it, I thought, oh no, is this going to be it? And it was all a dream. And it was really important for me to it be written in the way that it was, to not feel that way, because a part of me was like, I have this thing like, but more of like, oh no, this was just all a dream, and like that's kind of like been overdone, right?
Yeah,
Wizard of Oz.
It's a cliche, and it's like really disheartening to be like, oh, you can only be a socialist if you're dreaming.
Oh, God, I didn't even think about that part of it. Jesus. But like, it is what I think was, I don't know. It's still part of me is like, man, that kind of sucked. But also like, it's really important that
it's
idea.
So powerful.
Yeah. And it's the idea that you even in the end are kind of left with, oh, but is this right? We just read this whole story about this. Is this one section really the truth? And it's like, that's really important to question, in that it's important to the fact that you're questioning it is important. So like it's lucky it was written so well, or else I would have been like, oh man, this is like, it was all a dream, and like that kind of sucks. But it didn't suck.
I personally believe that feminism should be challenging rather than comforting. And this is in very broad strokes. You can hear more about it in the Barbie episode. So I believe, again, that feminism should be challenging rather than comforting. And that twist challenged me.
There's a shirt that I keep seeing out there that kind of reminds me of this, of like things like you want to believe the fantastical, but like the actuality of it is worse than it was. They didn't burn witches, they burned women. And I was like, oh fuck, right? We always want to say that we're the witches, but we are just women. And that sucks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of this.
I want media to challenge me in this way if we're going to call it feminist. It is not enough for me to be comforted by quote unquote feminist media anymore, you know? That's how I feel. And I know that that's like a contentious point. Everybody's at different spaces in their, big feminist journey of life or whatever. But for me to even say that something might be feminist, I need to be challenged by it.
Well, if you're not challenged, then you're just kind of like, oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, I'm just kind of nodding my head, which to me is not...
well, okay. I shouldn't say that, because I don't think that's true for everyone. Because I think as a young person, it was important for me to have these stories that were like, oh, isn't that great? But I think without getting angry, it doesn't necessarily, for me personally, force me to have those tough discussions, as opposed to saying, well, just go look at this. This is a great example of what it could be.
Yeah.
When there are still, I mean, feminism is still something created by people. It's still flawed, and we still need to continuously perfect it.
Yeah.
It'll never be perfect, but you know.
Interestingly, Gray himself raises this question in one of the fake reviews in Poor Things, the book. Because you listened to the audiobook.
They had them.
They did. Okay.
They did.
So
I thought I was done. I was like, man, there's like a bunch left. Like, what is the rest of this? And I'm pretty sure this book just ended.
There's a bunch of fake reviews, and one of them is, it's from The Scotsman, and reads, "Can a man make a feminist? It is the final riddle of a mesmerizing mind game in which not even the heroine, and certainly not the author, can be trusted. Only Gray's readers can provide the answers, and they are lucky, lucky things indeed."
I think that specific review was really important to the ending of me feeling like, oh no, was it all a dream?
Right.
I think those were so important to understand the point of that.
And this raises a really valid question, right? And this is, again, a fake review written by Gray. This is not a real review. No. So Gray initially raises the question, can a man make a feminist? Can Book Bella be a feminist given that she's raised outside of patriarchal culture in many ways? Can she be a feminist given that she was created to be a potential sexual and romantic interest for her creator? Can she be a feminist character written by a man? How about in the movie? These are all great questions.
They're extremely great questions.
And I think what this fake review says is true. Only Gray's readers can provide the answer, right? Gray cannot tell us, yes, she is a feminist. He doesn't tell us, which is precisely how it should be. We are the people who get to decide, can a man make a feminist? And
I also feel like it's really important, because I feel like there's this default, at least in the spaces that I have seen online, of men can't write women.
Yes.
And I don't like that, because that also do that mean women can't write
spicy
men?
Takes here at Fake Geek Girls. It also drives me bananas.
Yeah, I
get it. I get where it comes from. Our narratives are dominated by men. A lot of the narratives by men are bad and icky and poorly written, right?
But we don't want to be misandrous. Like, we don't want to live in like the female version of patriarchy.
Right. And like, it's complicated, right? Like, you kind of, if you're hearing this and this is like your first time listening to us, or
you might be confused.
Yeah, you might be really resistant to what we're saying, and I totally respect that. I recommend going and listening to a few
Barbie.
Our Barbie episodes in particular will shed a little more light on our thinking here. We just can't rehash all that because we already did 2 entire episodes on Barbie.
It was great.
I had a lot to say.
It was a great. Those are some of my favorite episodes. So you just should go listen to them. Go re-listen.
And my cat,
and then leave us a review.
My cat is also a feminist, and she agrees.
She's a misandrist.
Yeah, absolutely.
So get it right.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into the question of whether it being Poor Things can be feminist by looking at some of the criticisms of Poor Things. And we're going to begin here with my old friend, the male gaze. I am not
the gaze.
Not the gaze, the gaze.
The gaze.
I'm not going to do another deep dive here. You can listen to our Magic Mike episode if you want to hear a more in-depth discussion of Laura Mulvey's original piece, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. Mulvey, who popularized the term male gaze, views film as a potential tool of patriarchy. Because men hold more power in our society and men often hold positions of power in cinema, we've developed the male gaze, the pleasure of the male viewer, which comes from voyeurism, pleasure from looking, and pleasure from contemplating the self. According to Mulvey, there are 3 essential pieces of male gaze. So these 3 things, according to Mulvey, are necessary in order for us to say that something is truly male gaze. The man behind the camera, the men within the film, and the male spectator, the audience. Women, in Mulvey's theory, are passive objects of this gaze. So women under the male gaze function as passive objects rather than subjects. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if we take this very literally, yes, Poor Things, the film, is subject to the male gaze, right? The film has a male director and cinematographer. Men in the film look at Bella. Men in the audience look at Bella. All likely derive the pleasure behind the male gaze from looking at her.
Everyone gets pleasure from looking at Emma Stone.
It's true. But if that were enough to make something male gaze, every movie that meets that criteria should be subject to the same criticism, right? Anytime a woman appears on screen and we derive pleasure from looking at her, that becomes problematic, right? A movie like Thelma and Louise, directed by a man, filmed by a man, featuring 2 beautiful women who are looked at by men in the film and in the audience, doesn't usually get called male gaze. That's because a key piece of Mulvey's argument is the way that the male gaze transforms a woman from subject to object. A woman under the male gaze is a passive object to be looked at. She has a quality that Mulvey actually refers to as, quote, to be looked atness. It's clunky, but it gets the point across, right? She is invested with a quality called to be looked atness. That is her primary function.
It kind of feels like this term was created so no one would get it wrong. And so
exactly.
That's so many did.
Exactly.
Will you give an example at some point in here of a good example of male gaze as opposed?
One of the best examples in recent memory is in the new Star Trek movies, where there's a scene where the woman she's just in her bra and underwear for seemingly no reason whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Her quality there is to be looked atness. Yes, she might serve another purpose in that scene, but her primary quality is to be looked atness, right? She is there to be looked at. Do you remember that part?
Yes.
Okay. That is a great example of male gaze.
Never mind. I don't want to bring that into it. I was thinking about porn.
Oh.
And object is subject.
Well, porn is male gaze, right?
But at what point does it stop being male gaze?
It depends. Part of it's going to depend on who's doing the shooting.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, at what point does it stop?
Because there's lesbian porn that's male gaze, right?
Yeah.
It's not like exclusively porn can only be male gaze, but like I think the majority of porn that you find online is male gaze. It's produced for men by men, and the women are imbued with the quality of to be looked atness. This is how it is.
Yeah. There are a lot of questions there.
Yeah. It's not impossible to have.
No, I know. It's just interesting because everybody like, oh, no, I should say, but a vast majority of people enjoy some type of porn. So
sure.
Like, where does where does that cross over? And like some people enjoy weird types of porn and some people don't. And like even if it's not male gaze, anyways.
It's complicated. It's really, really complicated. We have had on our list forever a potential topic of talking about porn and like what feminist porn is and what it looks like. It'll never be done. Yeah, I don't think that's like one of
But it's a great idea.
But it's a great idea.
Don't make us do it, please.
Yeah. A woman under the male gaze is a passive object to be looked at. She's imbued with the quality of to be looked at-ness. She is there to be seen. Maybe she does some other things, but she is there to be looked at. I won't say that this is never true of Bella/Emma Stone in Poor Things, right? Mm-hmm. She is a beautiful woman. Sometimes the camera, the director, the cinematographer, the audience derive pleasure from looking at her, right? That's true. I am but a humble bisexual. Sometimes I derive pleasure from looking at Emma Stone. Sometimes straight women derive pleasure from looking at Emma Stone.
Not me.
Not Mary.
Too straight.
But is Bella's primary quality to be looked at-ness?
Well, I think especially in the movie too, they really, if you are going to derive pleasure from, they're going to make you feel so uncomfortable about it as possible.
So Lanthimos as a director is somewhat, I'm not going to say like he's the feminist hero we need or anything like that, but Lanthimos is somewhat resists the temptation. He doesn't have his actors wear makeup.
That's pretty good. It just happens to be that Emma Stone's
gorgeous. Just really pretty is the thing, right? Like you can't make Emma Stone less hot. She is hot.
Yeah, I can't imagine someone doing it.
But it's notable that throughout the movie, the only time that Bella wears makeup is when she is working in the brothel.
Yeah.
And the makeup that she's wearing is garish. It is not flattering.
Yeah.
But it is makeup because that is what the Johns want to see, right?
Yeah. Well, also, like, her mannerisms are so, like...
I have a great quote about this later.
It's almost like sometimes she's walking backwards.
Yeah. I have a great quote about that later. Well,
it was one of the things I really liked about watching the movie is, like, here's this beautiful woman, and so many men are going to have to feel uncomfortable finding her attractive for many different reasons.
Yes. So again, this question, is Bella's primary quality to be looked at-ness? I mean, no, right? Like, kind of obviously no. Things do get complicated with male gaze. You could argue that one of Jennifer's primary characteristics in Jennifer's Body is her to be looked at-ness, but calling that movie male gaze is iffy, in part because of the female director, of course. But I think we can safely say that while male gaze might apply at times throughout Poor Things, calling the movie male gaze as a whole is incorrect. Sorry. Like, I'm sorry about it. I saw this from a lot of people, but I disagree. Male gaze is not the primary term I would use to describe Poor Things.
And I think that people just conflate woman pretty.
Woman pretty is not male gaze.
Woman pretty, breast out, male gaze.
Yeah.
Because I can see someone saying, like, what was the point of seeing her breasts, blah, blah, blah. But also,
sometimes people are naked during sex.
Well, also, like, Emma Stone's boobs are not large. They're small. Yeah. And it's like, they're never, like, it doesn't feel, I don't know, to me, it doesn't feel sexual. At the same time, though, I am a heterosexual woman, so who knows?
Let me get out my soapbox for a minute, and I will talk about the moment that is most male gaze.
You should bedazzle your soapbox.
Yeah, and I did.
Or paint it with moss or something.
Yeah, it's a great soapbox. I wish you could see it. I'm standing on top of my soapbox right now, and I'm pulling out my megaphone, and I'm saying to all of you, the most male gaze section of the film. Here, I'll do a little sound effect by cupping my mouth here. The most male gaze section of the film is the part where Emma Stone doesn't have any fucking armpit hair. Because here's the thing. This movie takes place in an alternate universe, Victorian London, which predates the intentional targeting of women by Gillette razors to shave their body hair. There is no fucking reason that Bella shouldn't have armpit hair.
And in fact, many men find armpit hair not just gross, but like unsettling.
They find it unsanitary, and that's because of decades of marketing.
Yeah.
They're wrong.
They're like literally wrong.
They're
it's
literally
like actually better for you.
You know what? I'm coming out here on the podcast as a fan of body hair.
Yeah, you shave. I think it's cute. Shave yours.
I do. I get itchy.
I know Missy gets itchy.
I get real itchy.
I don't shave my legs, but not because like I'm like, oh, feminism. I just am like, I don't enjoy taking a shower. It just I'd rather do something else. Like sometimes after like a hard day, I'm like, oh, okay, this is nice, but I'm still more likely to just like sit under the shower.
And that's your right.
Yeah. I'm just like, after a while it grows, it becomes real soft and it's fine.
Yeah.
Sometimes I shave my legs and I'm like, look, my husband, I shaved my leg. And he's like, you missed so much. This is not what you think it is.
This ain't it. Anyway, I'm getting off my soapbox now and we'll get back to the topic.
It's been put away.
I put it away. This is a quote from The Voyeuristic Faux Feminism of Poor Things by Luke Wademoyer, who writes, "The path to liberation for Bella Baxter, the Frankenstein's monster-esque protagonist, is framed primarily through her sexual awakening. Her independence from the patriarchy and male gaze are represented by Mark Ruffalo's womanizing Duncan Wedderburn, is supposedly gained by taking control of her body and desires, breaking free of societal expectations by asserting herself sexually. This sexual liberation, of course, is demonstrated visually through copious raunchy sex scenes, which, frankly, come off as near pornographic. I have no issue with sexual content in film, but when that content is actively contradictory to the themes explored and becomes the entirety of the character, it becomes problematic as it does here." I have to be honest, I found this article hilarious overall, especially because the self-flagellation of the writer saying that technically he knows it's not really his business to be writing it when he's critiquing men for telling a woman's story, but then he goes ahead and does it anyway, so I don't know.
Well, I have this idea that the sex is pornographic to be wild. Because that sex is like, I like, it's like the adult equivalent of a child like smashing two bricks together.
Yeah.
It's not sexy. I read that.
It reminds
me. What did you watch?
The sex scenes remind me actually quite a bit of the Almighty Johnsons, in that they're kind of this goofy, like,
it feels like
bodies are funny. Sex is funny.
Well, it feels like a caricature of sex.
Yeah.
And I felt like,
I think it's realistic. But we're so used to seeing sex through this like kind of hazy, beautiful lens, unless we're literally talking about pornography. Like if we're talking about the average R-rated movie, right? Sex is this very like beautiful, tender, well, not necessarily tender, but like it's shot beautifully. It tends to focus on individual body parts rather than the whole. And you don't really see like thrusts or sweating or grunting or anything. It kind of takes the body out of sex. Pornography is different, right? Pornography does different stuff.
But this guy says it's raunchy, near
He's
pornographic.
wrong.
Like, you know what's raunchy and near pornographic? American Pie. Like, this is not that. I'm just like, what porn are you watching? I mean, that's cool. That's cool.
You do,
you, dude. But I don't know. It felt like a monkey slamming bricks together. And that's her face almost looked like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
She was enjoying it. Don't get me wrong. Like, she's very clear. Like, especially in the movie, she enjoyed it, right?
Yeah.
But it still felt like slamming two bricks together. Even the sounds.
I think that's the reality of sex.
But it's not pornographic.
That's the thing, is that pornographic, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later with the idea of Audre Lorde's idea of the erotic. But pornography and sex are two different things.
Yeah.
And this movie is conflating graphic sex with pornography in a way that is inaccurate.
Yeah, that's my issue. Is that this guy is saying feels like he's watching like porn, and I'm like, what porn are you watching? But at the same time, I guess I just need to stop being so judgmental.
I mean, if this is the kind of pornography he's watching, he's making an interesting assumption about the kinds of pornography everybody else is watching.
Well, it really, for me, it was a really important part of the movie in that I thought, in my mind, at least, that it's part of the, like, here's a woman who is naked, but you have to confront the fact that this looks awkward and is not
this ain't about
sexy.
you.
Yeah, you have to like be like, oh, I find this woman attractive, but I have to deal with the fact that she's like a literal child, and the fact that I'm watching her have sex, but it's like slamming two bricks together.
The thing to me is that it looks like real sex.
Yeah, but that isn't like. But
that's not sexy.
Yeah. So for
watching real people have sex is less sexy than you would imagine.
Yeah. So for me, when I read this, I'm just like, okay, I guess we just saw different things.
Where was I? Anyway, he's not wrong that the story of Bella's growth does feature a lot of sex, and those sex scenes are visual in nature. We see Bella having sex first with Duncan Wedderburn, then with a series of men as she works in a brothel. I kept reading people talking about this movie as this glorious sex fest with an incredible amount of graphic sex scenes, and admittedly, I know I have a higher threshold for sex scenes than the average online person. I forgot how graphic the sex scene in the pilot of Interview with the Vampire is until watching it with my in-laws, who were quite embarrassed while I was completely unbothered. But I did not remember the sex being particularly graphic for an R-rated film, right? This is an R-rated movie we're talking about. So I timed it out of curiosity. In Poor Things, a 141-minute movie, 4.7 minutes are sex, both with Wedderburn and the brothel scenes, and I was quite generous on some of those scenes. And 2.5 minutes are masturbation, where you might see a breast, but in one of them, you fully just look at her legs and face. That's about 5% of the total runtime of the film. So not an insignificant amount of sex, right?
I mean, I would like to know that compared to other movies that
I think
have
it's
sex.
more than usual.
Yeah.
So it's not an insignificant amount of sex, but also the people calling the movie pornography can fuck right off. Like,
well,
that's some silliness.
I do feel like this idea of sex in media has changed from...
Oh, absolutely.
So I can understand where people are coming from. I don't think they're correct. I just think that there has been a shift in the way that the public sees sex. It has become a icky thing almost.
Every individual is entitled to feel about representations of sex however they want, but calling this movie pornography is hilarious and hyperbolic. It's not.
It's not, because it's just... Pornography to me feels like a very specific thing. And this is just slamming bricks together.
Yeah.
They're bumping uglies.
Not all representations of sex are erotic. Not all representations of sex are pornographic. Some representations of sex are just representations of sex. Sex is the thing that many people do.
Yeah.
And depictions of it are not inherently beautiful or erotic.
Yeah.
That said, Whittemore isn't entirely wrong here that Bella's journey of self-discovery, and more importantly self-creation, more on that a bit later, does involve quite a lot of sex, and there are men behind the story. So maybe this is all just a thinly veiled excuse to shoot Emma Stone having a bunch of sex so we can look at her.
Wow, that would be a statement.
Yeah. But no.
But you're wrong.
We're going to talk about Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic as power. So it's important to note that when Lorde uses the term erotic, she is not speaking only of sex or sexual pleasure, though sex can certainly be a part of it. Lorde draws her use of the term erotic from its Greek root in eros, which she calls, quote, the personification of love in all its aspects, unquote. She also distinguishes between the erotic and pornography, the latter of which she says is, quote, the suppression of true feeling. It emphasizes sensation without feeling, unquote. That's an important distinction there, right? And just like we were just talking about with regard to pornography and like the depictions of something that is erotic, something that is just sex happening, something that is pornographic. She says again, pornography is the suppression of true feeling. It emphasizes sensation without feeling, right? Which I think when you look at pornography, you can see that.
I mean, I'm not a pornography connoisseur, but I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think in broad strokes, pornography is about sensation as opposed to
quick
feeling.
Sensation. Quick
sensation, yeah. There are exceptions, of course. There's exceptions to every rule, but in broad strokes, pornography is, as Lorde says, sensation without feeling. Further, she says, another important way in which the erotic connection functions is the open and fearless underlining of my capacity for joy, in the way my body stretches to music and opens into response, hearkening to its deepest rhythms, so every level upon which I sense also opens to the erotically satisfying experience, whether it is dancing, building a bookcase, writing a poem, examining an idea. So again, the erotic can but does not exclusively include sex. It's connection with anything that creates and celebrates joy. Connection to the erotic can infuse any activity with that sense of pleasure. That's why Lorde says building a bookcase.
So is she just making two distinctions between porn and eroticism?
No, not necessarily. So in this essay, she's talking about how the erotic has been suppressed in women throughout society and how that creates a sense of alienation and disconnection that prevents us from reaching our true potential.
That's why doctors prescribe Akatar.
Don't. Get out.
But am I wrong? Like I feel like this person, like the doctor could say,
Lorde.
"Here's a great example of what I'm saying."
Yeah.
Never in any world would I have been able to guess that.
I know, but she's not necessarily talking about pornography. She's talking about the importance of the erotic, and the erotic in. She's not talking about pornography, but she's saying. Just pornography is not inherently the erotic. that she's discussing. She goes on to say that self-connection shared is a measure of the joy which I know myself to be capable of feeling, a reminder of my capacity for feeling. And that deep and irreplaceable knowledge of our capacity for joy comes to demand from all my life that it be lived within the knowledge that such satisfaction is possible and does not have to be called marriage, nor God, nor an afterlife. This is one reason why the erotic is so feared and so often relegated to the bedroom alone when it is recognized at all. For once we begin to feel deeply all the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from our life pursuits that they feel in accordance with that joy which we know ourselves to be capable of. Our erotic knowledge empowers us. So the erotic that Lourdes discusses here is a liberation. When our happiness comes from within and is self-created through our connection to ourselves and our love, we no longer rely on outside sources, particularly those that can be sources of pain or control. She brings up God and marriage. If we are liberated from those sources of love, we have the power to seek love and joy and the erotic where we need and to demand it from our loved ones, right? When we recognize that these things don't have to come from existing structures, that we can create them ourselves and feel them ourselves, we are liberated from the necessity of ideas like marriage and God. To continue, she says, we have been raised to fear the yes within ourselves, our deepest cravings. But once recognized, those which do not enhance our future lose their power and can be altered. The fear of our desires keeps them suspect and indiscriminately powerful, for to suppress any truth is to give it strength beyond endurance. The fear that we cannot grow beyond whatever distortions we may find within ourselves keeps us docile and loyal and obedient, eternally defined, and leads us to accept many facets of our oppression as women. So I think we can see here how this idea of the erotic can shape our view of Bella. Unlike most of us, Bella is without shame and doesn't find it difficult at all to find joy and pleasure in herself. She's liberated in that sense because she has no need for God or marriage or anything else. She loves the world and all its pleasures until she is exposed to the truth in Alexandria, and in the book devotes herself to improving the world through socialism. I don't want to argue that all depictions of women having sex are liberatory because obviously they aren't. That would be a goofy ass thing to say. But we have to look beneath the surface of what's being depicted in Poor Things. Yes, Bella has a lot of sex. Yes, Bella is a beautiful woman. Yes, the movie is made by men. Yes, men look at her. But who is the sex serving at its core? Is it for us or is it for her? It's both, right? And we can't discount the parts that are for her character and make sense for her character just to kind of further the idea that this is a male gaze film. Or as Jess Cartner Morley says in She's Bound and Gagged for Laughs, is Poor Things a feminist masterpiece or an offensive male sex fantasy? So Cartner Morley says, it would be a bit bleak to dismiss the notion of a woman enjoying sex as an unrealistic male fantasy. Not just bleak, but also unfair to young women who surely should be going into the experience believing that sex is something they should expect to enjoy. A healthy conversation about consent starts from a baseline that if anyone isn't having fun, that is a problem. The idea of consent here is a sticking point for a lot of people, given that Bella begins with the brain of a child. Though, to be fair, we all begin life with the brain of a child.
Yeah, but she develops quicker, so then the question becomes, is she still a child?
How developed is she? And
yeah.
The thing that gets me is people think that the Bella that you meet at the beginning of the film is the same Bella that you have at the end of the film, which is like clearly untrue and is a bad faith reading.
Yeah.
My point here, I'm not trying to be just like bitchy about it, about the idea, like, of her having a brain of a child. We all have the brain of a child, but like, it is literally true. We start life as children. Just because we were once children doesn't mean we're children anymore. Just because Bella starts the film as a child doesn't mean that she has the brain of a child at the end.
Yeah, but I can understand people feeling uncomfortable in that.
Oh, I agree. They should.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it's important they feel comfortable, but I do
feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, yes, feel uncomfortable. But like, there is such a little amount of time, so then the question becomes, does she still have the brain of a child? But obviously, she's developed more, and so it becomes a little bit more complicated in that sense. But I think, in my personal opinion, I do like the idea of her like still having like the brain of a child because I think it makes some men uncomfortable.
Oh, and again,
I like that.
I have a great quote about that later.
That was one of the things I really liked about this movie of men specifically having to confront the fact that they find a literal child's brain attractive because they have to take away the fact that this person acts like a child.
Yes.
So like them, like Bella still essentially being a child all the way through, simply just having like a smarter brain.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's, I feel.
I mean, what is a child?
Yeah, sure. Yes. But I think that's all part of it of like, I think it's good for people to have these conversations in their brain. I just hope that some people don't use it as a way to like, be like, well, you know, what is a child?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk a bit more about this in a bit. For now, let us accept that Bella is who she says she is, a young woman who enjoys sex. Sex for her can be a source of joy, a reason to be alive, and it can be liberation. That is allowed, even if we sometimes look at these scenes and go, who is this for? That's still a valid question. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of readings of this film that basically say Bella is not correct about herself. And hey, I hate that.
Sure do.
I hate that. I understand where it comes from. I want to be clear. I understand where that desire to be like, well, Bella's a child and like not a full adult. I understand where it comes from, but also women can decide things.
I do want to make it clear. I do think that there are two different situations happening here in which Bella is having her own experience and the viewer is having a different one.
Absolutely.
So that's what I mean when I say like men specifically having to confront this idea of do they find a child attractive when it comes to like mental maturity?
And what do they find attractive?
Yeah, and what do they find attractive? Do they find attractive the fact that she doesn't have the mental maturity in the beginning? And so like, and that's a separate thing, as in Bella has her own autonomy.
Yeah. As Kai Graves points out in Deviance and the Aesthetic Schema, a queered Somaesthetic analysis of poor things, Bella's sense of joy can be said to queer the role of womanhood in Victorian society, in that she challenges the assumptions about that role and pushes everybody out of their comfort zones. She's also literally queer, both in the book and the film. Bella, in seeking pleasure for herself rather than being an object of pleasure for men, resists the social expectations placed on herself, including, in my opinion, the ones that Godwin places on her, even the more benevolent Godwin of the film. Just to continue from that essay by Graves, Graves writes, finally, recognizing the clitoris as a source of pleasurable sensuality that historically and arguably contemporarily is viewed as taboo and shameful, its history and erasure, both literally and figuratively, can render it as, quote, symbolic, corporeal, and experiential territory that may be occupied by others, in this case men, unquote, who wish to exert extreme power and violence over others. The threat of castrating the protagonist attempts to sever not only a source of embodied pleasure and joy, but symbolically hinders her somatic experiences of knowing, being, and experiencing. So the threat of genital mutilation is at once a literal threat. We'll control you by taking away the thing that we believe is causing your erratic behavior, because that's what they believed in the Victorian era, and arguably today in many ways. Mm-hmm. And it's also a metaphorical threat, because if the clitoris is, for most people with vulvas, the thing that allows an orgasm to happen, removing it is removing a thing that allows for pleasure, but importantly, it removes the specific thing for pleasuring herself. That is so important. The idea, it's for pleasuring herself. Bella refers to orgasm initially as happy when I want. That is the phrase that she uses to describe orgasm. Happy when I want. Meaning she's able to make herself happy on her own terms. Again, this isn't the be-all end-all of happiness, but it's clear from the events of the movie that sex and pleasure are one means by which Bella discovers, enjoys, and invents herself, making genital mutilation a particularly cruel means of trying to control her and make her a quote-unquote normal woman. This idea of embodied pleasure is really important to Belly. It's really important to Bella's character. If they remove her clitoris, she no longer experiences that pleasure, but other people can use her body for that purpose. Yeah. Again, this is both a real world threat and a very metaphorical one for Bella, who can no longer, as she put it, be happy when she wants. That is how masturbation is identified for her. And towards the end of the movie, they attempt to take that away from her. Bella is free from societal conditioning for the most part. Baxter tries to isolate her from the world, but she still has do's and don'ts from Archie/Max, Baxter himself, and the housekeepers. She therefore takes an interest in herself and in other people, and socialism in the book primarily, in a way that's unusual for a woman of her time. The story lets us look at a person who isn't raised with societal conventions and see what happens. She's liberated in a way most of us could never hope to be, right? Because all of us are we live in a society, as they say. But all of this isn't to say the film is perfect. As I said, I wouldn't call the film feminist, though I'd be willing to entertain an argument about the book. That's not just because I'm reluctant to call media feminist either, especially now that I've read the book. The feminism of the film feels especially unimpressive.
Well, it takes out such a huge part.
Yeah, it's similar to the way I felt about Barbie. Barbie and Poor Things are not the same. I felt more challenged by Poor Things, but I would not call either movie feminist. This is actually a quote from a Reddit thread, the baffling discourse around Poor Things, which was started by Doctor of Cinema, and this is a response from Emily Pandemonium. Do you think they ever thought they'd be being quoted? Well, this is on the True Film subreddit, so this is people who want to have deep conversations about film. So Emily Pandemonium writes, "You see how the film hits a sour note in comparison. It takes the husband's word as gospel, grafts his story onto Bella's point of view, and obliterates the original voice of Victoria McCandless, a woman demanding recognition of her frankly more believable account against the fantastical ravings of a man. Lanthimos chose essentially to believe the man. Of course, the book was also written by a man, so it's men upon men upon men. The question is which man's version of this woman you prefer. To me, the conflict of Alasdair Gray's Poor Things, male fantasy versus women's memories, and which people choose to believe, rings truer than under the surreal fluff." I completely agree with this. I'm going to argue a bit later on why Lanthimos made this choice. I don't think it's solely because he quote unquote believes McCandless's story.
I don't think so because he got the go ahead.
Yeah, blessing. He got the author's blessing. And it obviously the story's fiction, so like he doesn't believe it. But once you know what happens in the book, the movie does feel a bit hollow. Well, I don't know if it felt hollow to me. It just felt like a strange choice. Yeah. Like, couldn't we have leaned harder on Max's treatment of her? Couldn't we have had a bit more about reproductive rights and Bella wanting to become a doctor? I'm not opposed to the 7 minutes of sex scenes in total, but surely we could have used a bit of the time pulled a little bit of time from something to make her goals for after the film's events clearer. I think it would have been really cool to show, because in the movie they show her with all the weird Frankenstein-y type of care. Wouldn't it have been really interesting if they showed her with her child that she had lost and like in a normal situation and working in a clinic? Yeah, and been like, and then this idea of questioning would have been pretty easy to bring in. And it's interesting that they didn't do that. Yeah. It kind of turns into good for her. Yeah. There's a brief reference to her studying anatomy at the very end, almost certainly to become a doctor, but I would like some clear line from Alexander to the brothel to there. And that's just not prioritized in the film. So, male gaze. Probably not, but maybe sometimes. But that's not the only criticism that's leveraged at the film. The other one is that it falls into the born sexy yesterday trope. This trope, coined by Jonathan McIntosh of Pop Culture Detective, refers to the sort of adult baby character you see in many sci-fi shows and movies where a character has the body of a hot adult woman and the brain of maybe not a child, but certainly an extremely naive person who absolutely needs the guidance of a character who is inevitably a man who also becomes her lover, most likely. Characters like whatever her name is in Tron, Lilu, is that right? Lilu in The Fifth Element? I think so. What's her name in Weird Science, that kind of thing, right? Now, Poor Things quite literally has an adult woman's body with a child's brain in it. That is literally the premise of the movie. Does that make an example of the born sexy yesterday trope, especially given how much sex she has? If it is an example of the trope, is that inherently a bad thing? Are you ready to get a bit spicy? I'm so ready because I super think it flips it on its head. Yes. So my hot take, which is this shouldn't be a fucking hot take, but it is. It really shouldn't. Tropes themselves are not bad. It is not bad to just be a trope or to have a trope. Over-reliance on tropes can make for stale storytelling, and some tropes can be genuinely harmful. Born Sexy Yesterday could certainly be one of those tropes that is harmful. The questions for me are, does Poor Things accurately fit the idea of Born Sexy Yesterday? And if it does, how is it using that trope? For sexy reasons or for something else? On the one hand, yes, Bella is an adult with a child's brain. Period. True. Absolutely. We've checked that box. But for how long? We know her development is happening rapidly. That's what Max is there to tell us. That is Max's function. And we see her go from extremely childlike behavior to adolescent behavior over a very short period of time in the film. and then grow further than that. Max is absolutely attracted to her before she reaches any kind of adult development, both in the book and the movie. And Baxter, in the book, explicitly creates Bella as a partner. He says he wants, quote, a woman who needed and admired me, unquote, specifically based on an illustration of Ophelia looking off the page and imagining himself as the savior of the whole story. Yuck!
When I read that part, I think I immediately texted Missy and I said, this man would love Ophelia. That was, for me, was like the piece of information that just like dug it in. Here's who this man is. This is the spoon that fed me.
Yep. And the fact that he experienced no shame in admitting that.
No, he's like, isn't this, I am another man.
Yeah.
To be in love with her.
Hate that man. We can't stop there though, right? In the book, at least, Gray isn't creating Baxter as a sympathetic character. He is one of many men who try to control Bella. Notably, Bella doesn't forgive him in the book. Much of this is stripped away in the film. Baxter is forgiven. He was not creating Bella to have sex with her, which is another reason that I say that if I were willing to say something was feminist, I would apply that to the book and not the film. The book is much more engaged with the ideas of feminism than the film is. But even the film has its own pushback on the idea of born sexy yesterday. Yes, she was literally born sexy yesterday, right? But while men are involved in her growth into an adult, scare quotes because I think it's less about adulthood and more about independent personhood, but it's adulthood that people are more concerned with since consent is an issue. It really is Bella's undertaking to become a quote-unquote adult. Duncan is a great illustration of this. Did you have something you wanted to say before I read a quote?
No, you can read the quote.
Okay. So Duncan is a great illustration of this idea of her quote unquote adulthood, which I actually think is personhood, being her own undertaking. This is from Viewing Poor Things Through the Eyes of the Feminist Canon, which is by Nicole Fox, who writes, Duncan exhibits negative reactions to Bella's freedoms. He also becomes threatening when she does not subscribe to his expectations, which align with the expectations placed upon women in Victorian society, a society which Bella has just recently become a member. In her work, When We Dead Awaken, Rich writes that women, quote, have known that men would tolerate, even romanticize us as special, as long as our words and actions didn't threaten their privilege of tolerating or rejecting us according to their ideas of what a special woman ought to be, unquote. Duncan struggles in his relationship with Bella because she is not subscribing to his ideas of the woman she should be.
This is where, for me, this movie did, like, really captured me of that. Okay, so Born Sexy Yesterday, right? Like you said, yes, she literally is. But where I think that this movie really, like, flips it is she is born sexy yesterday, yet she pees herself. Yet she can't use a spoon and fork. It's literally disgusting.
Yes.
But when she finally gets a brain, quote unquote, when
she begins to develop,
when she begins to develop, she pisses men off.
Yes.
She pisses them off. And so that's why, for me, it can be born sexy yesterday, but it also is making it so, yeah, she's born sexy yesterday. Well, she's disgusting also.
Yeah.
Oh, now she has a brain that doesn't make her, like, she can actually eat, right? Well, she's gonna fucking make you mad.
Exactly.
And so, like, for me, that was, for the movie, that was the part where I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I want to see from this trope.
So if Born Sexy Yesterday really applied, Duncan might still be the villain for trying to mold her into the ideal Victorian woman. But in fact, Bella doesn't settle down for anyone, not even Max.
She uses them.
Yeah, I'm unsure what Max's role is in the movie. Like, do they have some kind of polycule happening between Bella and Toinette and Max, or is Max just hanging out? Like, what is the deal there? I don't know what's happening in the end there, but it's very purposeful, I think, that Bella clearly ends up romantically with Toinette and not any of the men who tried to control her. It's also important that she lets Baxter die. I and many others thought that she was going to put Baxter's brain into her husband's body, making him twice over her husband father.
I didn't.
You didn't?
No, I did not.
God, I was so scared of that. But the movie deliberately subverts that expectation. Max is likely pushed to the side, Baxter is dead, and her former husband has a goat brain. She doesn't exist for any of those men who wanted her or tried to control her, and is fully independent and in control of her life, which to me puts it outside of the frustrating parts of the Born Sexy Yesterday trope. Or, and this is the quote that I think you're going to love, as Verily Bitchy put it in a Patreon exclusive video called How to Build a Feminist, Verily Bitchy says, the reason Poor Things and Daisies work as feminist films is because they're about women who feel no shame, who break rules and act inappropriately. They push the idea of infantile femininity to the extreme. They take the misogynist stereotype that is used to both sexualize and dismiss women and dial it up to the point where it becomes revolting and unpleasant to men. Oh, you want a baby girlfriend? Well, she's gonna pee herself and steal your money.
I love that. I think that's too, like, part of the reason I was drawn to this idea of, like, the bimbo feminist, right?
Mm-hmm.
You think I'm a bimbo? Okay, well, I'm gonna push it as far as I can until you get really annoyed that I'm, like, hot and sexy, but talking about socialism.
Right.
I love that. I love that idea.
Mm-hmm.
I love making men uncomfortable in that way. And I think part of it is because, like, obviously not in the same way, but like in my career, I have made many men uncomfortable by speaking out because I look like I'm this person who I get things done and like I can do things really well. And I've worked and in most of my jobs work with a primarily male dominated fields. And I have made multiple men uncomfortable just by speaking.
Right.
Just by speaking.
Men hate it when women talk.
Like, seriously, I'm pretty sure that one of the jobs I was the first person to let go because I spoke too much. And so, like, this idea of making men uncomfortable for women having autonomy makes me really happy.
Yeah. The thing about the Born Sexy Yesterday trope is that it's usually about satisfying the desire for men's control and women's dependency on those same men with none of the drawbacks, right? So you have characters like Lilu who are totally dependent on the man. Maybe they have their own abilities and it's like sexy that they can use a gun or a sword or whatever.
But who's that sexy for?
Yeah, but who's it sexy for? With none of the drawbacks of having this naive woman fawn over you, right? Poor Things repeatedly resists that. Bella might still have an unusual way of speaking by the time that she leaves with Duncan Wedderburn, but she's not for him. Duncan Wedderburn is a means to an end for Bella. I think the film's use of unusual dialogue for her is a purposeful choice that I can't really say is good or bad, but I can see why people assume that because she talks like she does, like calling sex furious jumping, because she talks like that, she must not be an adult. But I don't think that's really the case.
The way that I saw it is I saw it as in a dialect of like, okay, somebody's from the South. They have a specific dialect in the way they say things. That's how I saw it.
And she developed this herself.
Exactly. And because she has so many different experiences, some were guarded, some were, you know, she was kept in a bubble, and some she was thrust and exposed into absolute craziness. For me, it felt like a dialect in which she has created.
What is an orgasm if not happy when I want?
Yeah.
Right?
Like I don't think that, to me, doesn't feel childish.
Just because she doesn't know the word orgasm doesn't mean that she's not, clearly articulating the idea of orgasm through what it is to her.
She never calls it like her private parts, right?
No.
Yeah. So like for me, it would be childish to be like, you're like saying like your privates, because that's something that we teach children and we shouldn't.
She has no shame about her body.
On that hill.
She's literally masturbating at the breakfast table.
Yeah. And she tries to get off the
woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
Yeah. Like, she has no shame around this because to her it is happy when I want. It's not something that she experiences shame around.
Yeah.
So this idea of her dialogue, like you said, I don't think it's meant to communicate that that she's a child. It's meant to communicate that she exists outside of like common speech almost.
Well, even when, you know, she developed so quickly, so she had to create these like almost quick hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how it felt for me.
Is it a good idea for her to go with Wedderburn? No, not at all. And she says that herself. Like, she clearly says, no, this is, I've never been left by somebody.
I think it's, she understands it's important to make bad decisions.
Yeah.
And it is kind of important to make bad decisions.
It's an important part of growing up to make bad decisions.
And she has to grow up pretty quickly, so let's just make the worst decisions.
She knows that it's a bad idea, but she wants to experience it anyway. That puts her maturity ahead of most in these kinds of relationships. That is actually maturity, to be like, yes, this is a bad idea and I'm going to do it anyway. She doesn't try to convince herself it's good, you know, which I think is maybe more immature. I don't want to say that you, the viewer, have to be comfortable with this, because I don't think it's meant to be comfortable. It's meant to make us wriggle in our seats a bit because we don't know how to feel. I certainly did. The first 45 minutes of that movie, I was like, oh boy, I don't know where this is going. I don't know how I'm meant to feel about this.
I loved it because I'm like, I love this makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like, I love that it makes people feel uncomfortable.
We saw Poor Things after we saw Barbie. And Barbie...
I didn't see it with everybody.
Yeah. Barbie never made me uncomfortable. Poor Things did, and that's why Poor Things really resonated with me, because it pushed me out of my comfort zone at times.
The furthest that Barbie made people feel uncomfortable was the end.
Yeah.
In her Birkenstocks. Not the Birkenstocks part.
It was the Birkenstocks.
It was the
in
Birkenstocks.
particular.
No, but like going to see the OBGYN.
Yeah.
And, like, in the Birkenstocks. Like that.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the furthest it got made people feel uncomfortable.
I went to see my OBGYN in my Birkenstocks.
You do a lot of things in your Birkenstocks, though.
They're really comfortable. Yeah. Sorry, I'm a Birkenstocks girly now.
I like them.
They're really comfy. That discomfort is a good thing. In that same video by Verily Bitchy, How to Build a Feminist, this is such a great video, and she didn't release it on YouTube because I think it was a bit too spicy for YouTube. Boy, howdy, is it a great fucking video. 10 out of 10. Great job, Verily Bitchy. If you're not watching Verily Bitchy, you gotta change that, and you should support her on Patreon. $3 a month, and you can be watching this video.
Sometimes I see things that you're like, I think it might have been too spicy. I'm like, I don't think it is. And then I have to remember that we're different.
We're built different.
I don't mean that
we
like,
were born sexy yesterday.
I don't mean that in the like, oh, we're not like other girls. I mean that as in like we try to have like hard discussions, and I think everyone wants to like listen to like essays, right, that confirm the way that they feel about things, and I think that that's fun too. And to be fair, Verily Bitchy is also like non-binary trans, and gets they're gonna be attacked quicker.
Yeah, and gets a lot of death threats. For things. Verily Bitchy rules. So in this video, How to Build a Feminist, they compare the typical Frankenstein with a woman type story. So stories like Pygmalion, various makeover stories, with Poor Things. Instead of being about a woman learning to be a socially acceptable woman, which is what you see in My Fair Lady, Clueless,
Taming of the Shrew.
It's about a woman rebelling against the role given to her, which is actually how Frankenstein works, right? Frankenstein is not about a person becoming a socially acceptable person. To me, Poor Things asks an interesting question. What if Frankenstein had been loved rather than feared? Can a monster become a person? Yes, of course, if given love and autonomy, which is precisely what happens with Bella and isn't what happens with Frankenstein's monster.
If I could have done one thing for my younger self, I would have given my younger self this book after I read Taming of the Shrew and got extremely mad.
Yeah.
I love Taming of the Shrew. And then it got to the end, I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah.
This wasn't the book. This wasn't the story I thought it was. Mm-hmm. And then imagine if I was just, but here is.
But here it is. Here is what should have happened. Do you have anything else to say about those the topic of feminism?
No,
and
it was so good.
It's good.
I also don't like naming calling them feminism. Not necessarily for, I think I was thinking about this. I don't think it's for the same reasons you feel. I think it just doesn't matter.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree.
It just doesn't matter.
There's like this,
and I think that feeds into your idea of like, it doesn't matter because that's not really what we're doing here. But for me, we're losing the plot when we do that.
There's this really great tweet. Let me see if I can find it because I think about it all the time when I'm thinking about this stuff.
I think it's important to talk about it, but I just don't. So many people end the conversation.
It's a tweet from Nega Versace on Twitter, which is in brackets, pop star a feminist? Is MasterCard a queer ally? Is this TV show my friend?
Yeah, that's basically, yeah.
What are these questions?
It just does, in the end, it doesn't really matter. It kind of almost feels like when someone asks other women, like, are you feminist? It's like, what does that mean?
What does that mean to you?
And what are you asking? What is the, if I come back and tell you what I think, are you going to be confused? If someone says no, what does that mean? Like, for me, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell me anything because when I say yes, are we going to stop talking?
Right. I am a feminist, right? Feminism is important to me, but also like in what way? Feminism is something I have to do.
Well, especially when you start talking about third wave, fourth wave, fifth wave, and it just becomes like, I don't know. I hate that question.
Yeah.
Are you a feminist?
What does that mean to you?
Yeah. What does that mean to you? Especially because some people are like, no, I like men.
Yeah.
And it just means something different to a lot of people.
Exactly.
So like my feminism is the same as others.
Yeah. So instead of being about feminism in the way that the book is, instead of being an example of the male gaze or the born sexy yesterday trope, I would argue that Poor Things is exploring existentialism, especially the film. Specifically, that people are responsible for their own fates and must live authentic lives. You can learn more about that idea in, of all things, our Shrek episode.
We are in multitudes of.
Yeah. We got it all, baby.
Yeah.
I do think the goals of the book are more complex, as we discussed earlier, but the film seems to strip away much of that in favor of exploring what it means to be a person.
I hope this is the first episode someone has listened to and get to just be like, what?
Magic Mike? Shrek?
What? Really? They're like, Barbie? Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that tracks.
Shrek?
But even
Jurassic Park, even.
Yeah. But even in the book, you have parts like Baxter discussing the way that doctors think, quote, life is an agitation and something essentially dead. They treat patients' bodies as if the minds, the lives were of no account, unquote. The story obviously pushes back on that quite a bit. Bella's body was dead, but her mind is not. Her life is not. The person she becomes, the person she builds herself into, is a different person from that initial version of Victoria, if we take McCandless's word as true. In the film, that's the only narrative we're presented with, so it's a bit different. And in creating Bella outside of society, especially given his unusual appearance, Bella grows up thinking that this is supposed to be about Godwin, especially given Godwin's unusual appearance, Bella grows up thinking that things that are strange to the average person are not strange at all. One of my favorite bits, like this is just like a favorite moment that I have of the book, is when Bella says, I have been told enough about these mighty epics of our race to know most people think God and me a very gothic couple. They are wrong. At heart, we are ordinary farmers like Cathy and Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights by one of those Brontes. If you're not familiar, Heathcliff and Cathy are indeed gothic figures, but they don't seem like it to Bella because their unfamiliar way of living to us is normal to her. As I mentioned earlier, unlike the book, Baxter is clear that his intentions for Bella included a sexual partner for himself. So this is a quote from Baxter in the book. By recasting its brain in the mother's body, I shortened her life as deliberately as if I had stabbed her to death at the age of 40 or 50, but I took the years off the start, not the ending of her life, a much more vicious thing to do, and I did it for the reason the elderly elderly lechers purchased children from bawds. Selfish greed and impatience drove me, and that is why our arts and sciences cannot improve the world, despite what liberal philanthropists say. Our vast new scientific skills are first used by the damnably greedy, selfish, impatient parts of our nature and nation. The careful, kindly, social part always comes second. Without Sir Colin's techniques, Bella would now be a normal 2.5-year-old infant. I could enjoy her society for another 16 or 18 years before she grew independent of me, but my damnable sexual appetites employed my scientific skills to warp her into a tidbit for Duncan Wedderburn, unquote. A few things to unpack from this quote. Baxter regrets making Bella in part because it was a cruel thing to do, to take years off the beginning of her life, especially because he did it for, in his words, lecherous reasons. He wanted a woman who would look at him with adoration and need, which is why he did it, and he wanted that immediately. So he made Bella a woman with no childhood. He goes on to say that this is evidence that art and science cannot improve the world because of greed. That is hot bullshit and a reflection of Baxter's self-involvement. It's subtle and not really revisited, but this is one of the clearest examples of Bella being her own person. She, despite literally the man she refers to as God, despite him having this attitude, she dedicates her life to the improvement of the world through art and science. She believes in a better world and she wants to be a part of his creation. And lastly, Baxter cites his, quote, damnable sexual appetites to blame for Bella being a, quote, tidbit for Duncan Wedderburn. Man, she chose to leave you. You didn't make a tidbit for anybody. You made a fucking person with her own will, and she chose to go have an experience with Wedderburn. That's what happens when you make a fucking person.
It's male fragility.
They have their own free will. Again, in the same way that Frankenstein is a story about what happens when you create a person and don't nurture it, Poor Things is in many ways a story about what happens when you create a person and love it in a selfish way. Mm-hmm. Baxter might be interested in Bella as a person, but it's further down on his list than loving her for sexual reasons or as an example of his own technological prowess. Later, he identifies Bella's development as making him feel like Shakespeare's school teacher, like Bella's success and growth is a value judgment of him for the positive. And honestly, I think we should just throw Baxter in the fucking bin. There are times when I agree with him philosophically, but boy, he fucking sucks in the book.
Sure does. Does Victoria? Victoria doesn't love him.
I think Victoria does care for him. I think she says she wanted to have sex with Baxter in her narrative.
I think she wanted to have a child with him.
That could be. It's been a minute, as I said.
I can't remember if she wanted to have a child with him or Bella wanted to have a child with him.
I don't think...
Because I think there was like, I just want a child.
Bella says that she could not... Bella says she could not have sex with...
Okay, so I think Victoria may have said, let's create a child because we are two smart people.
That could be. It's been over a month.
Hot minute.
Things have
happened. I know one of them was like, I want to create a child with you. I just can't remember which one it was.
Yeah. Bella does learn from Baxter, but she makes those lessons her own too. One of my favorite bits of the book is when she explains to, and I think it's Astley, but she explains to, I think Astley and Hoover, her thoughts on God, not Baxter, the other God. All I know about that God is what I was told by my own God, by my guardian, Godwin Baxter. He said God is a handy name for all and everything. Your top hat and dreams, Mr. Astley. Sky boots, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. Borscht, me molten lava time ideas, whooping cough, ecstasies of wedded bliss. My white rabbit Flopsy and the hut she lives in. Everything named in every dictionary and book there has ever been and ever could be adds up to God. But the holiest bit of God is movement because it keeps stirring things to make new ones. Movement turns dead dogs into maggots and daisies, and flour, butter, sugar, and egg, and a tablespoon of milk into Abernathy biscuits, and spermatozoa and ovaries into fishy little plants growing babyward if we take no care to stop them. And movement causes pain when solid bodies knock into living ones or living ones knock into each other, so to stop us getting knocked dead before life wears us out, we have generated, developed, evolved, acquired, invented, matured, gained, and grown eyes and brains to let us see knocks coming and dodge them, and how beautifully the whole godly clam jam free works.
That was a lot of word salad.
What a beautiful quote. This is before she goes to Alexandria and is exposed to the horrors of imperialism and poverty, but I don't think she ever really loses this attitude because, quote, the holiest bit of God is movement. She continues moving for the rest of her life, even as the Victoria that says McCandless's letter is bullshit. She is always working for a better world, even if McCandless's narrative is false, that part is true. And what I really love about Victoria's letter is that it proves the rest of the narrative correct. All of these men want to take credit for her creation of herself. Everything is she made herself. Fuck off. Victoria fucking rules. I love Bella.
So
I
angry.
love Victoria. Like, so good. It's so good. Admittedly, this existentialism section is a bit short, but you can go listen to the Shrek episode if you want to know more about that. Just read it. Just read the book. It's really good. The last thing I want to talk about is adaptation. Here's my take on Poor Things, the movie. Great movie. Great movie. Poor adaptation.
Agree.
This doesn't have to be a bad thing.
No, it doesn't, but it is I do question some things.
I think that Children of Men is an excellent movie and a poor adaptation of the work, but that is for the better because the work is so conservative and kind of dull. I don't think that's at all true of Poor Things. I think the book is incredible. But I don't think that adherence to source material should be the only metric by which we judge a piece of art's quality. I think the book is better, but I also love the movie. They have two distinct goals, and I like both of those goals.
I think it's good when, it's not always good to take pen and paper to TV or film.
Yeah.
I like the idea of creating, it's like a cover of a song.
Yeah.
Right? If you're just playing me the same song, why am I going to listen to it?
Yeah.
Why not listen to the original? I do question some changes that were made, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy the cover.
Yeah, I totally agree. But what does an adaptation owe the source material? Especially given that the source material is so political and so grounded in its place. Opinions from the Scottish literary scene and fans of the book are a bit divided. Most of what I saw seemed to say that they wished the movie was different, but that it wasn't a bad movie. One take I found particularly interesting was in this short documentary, Poor Things and Alasdair Gray's Legacy from Ossian, which includes an interview with Rog Glass, who wrote a biography of Gray. And he was kind of asked in this documentary, how do you feel about the fact that the film doesn't adapt, it leaves out the Scottishness? And Glass says, my feeling is that Alasdair, who spent his entire working life declaring the influence of other writers and rewriting stories in new ways and putting them in Scottish context, would be quite relaxed about somebody else taking his story and making something new and something of their own about it. And that's the end of that quote. But like the thing is that this is what Gray himself did with his work. Is Poor Things not a remixing of Frankenstein? Mm-hmm. Right? I don't know Gray and have only read this book by him, but I found this take profoundly generous, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Gray does work with numerous other stories in Poor Things. Frankenstein and Pygmalion are the two that he, through Victoria, cites most directly. Like she says, Archie McCandless has been influenced by stories like Pygmalion and Frankenstein in this stupid story he made up about me having a baby brain. Would Gray be upset that the Scottishness has been removed from the work, or would he be happy, like some of the interviewees in the short documentary, that the film will lead people to the book and the Scottish literature scene? We can't know that, right? Gray died in 2019. And while we might feel bad for him that his work doesn't contain the Scottishness he imbued it with, he also isn't the final authority on the text, you know?
Literally death of the author.
Yeah. That said, I do think it's a poor adaptation, which again is not the same as being a bad movie.
Such a poor thing.
Such a poor thing. It's not. I love it. I love watching it. I think it's beautifully made. I love the story it's telling, and I think a lot of the criticisms of it are shallow and misinformed. Sorry. But as we've discussed, the film is not perfect. Nothing is. And some of the places it fails for me are places that feel antithetical to the book, with the biggest being this. This is a quote from I Loved Barbie and Poor Things, but Neither Film is a Feminist Masterpiece by June Cho, who writes, Poor Things is supercilious yet silly, cramming in a bunch of socio-political topics without dedicated dissection. The frivolity makes the 2.5-hour runtime feel like a slap in the face. As Bella becomes progressively progressive, she donates to the poor, attends socialist meetings, and blithely comments on the fragility of hysterical men. All this evolution gets undermined when the film ends with her sipping a cocktail with her queer lover while commanding a zombie Bella 2.0 to fetch more drinks in her cloistered, opulent mansion. There's been a trend, I would say post 2016 or so, where movies have this sort of quote-unquote feminist gotcha ending where the woman who has been put upon throughout the story gets hers. And Ana de Armas sipping coffee from the balcony of the mansion in Knives Out. Samara Weaving covered in blood but smiling in the mansion at the end of Ready or Not. And now, I mean, even fucking Midsommar with Danny smiling. And now Bella sipping cocktails where her abusive ex eats grass because he's a goat. I don't think these endings are bad necessarily, but in the case of Poor Things in particular, where we have something to compare it to, like, man, this ending kind of sucks when you think about the book.
You should read Echo Wife. This is where I'm like, oh, this is a good commentary.
Like, it just kind of sucks when you think about the book.
It does.
I want Bella becoming a doctor to be the focus, or for her to be helping her community, or anything that isn't suggesting she's the same isolationist person Baxter was, walled up in her garden.
Yeah, that's true.
Has Bella really sampled everything the world has to offer and decided London is where she wants to be?
Well, especially when you strip out what she did for other women.
Yeah.
That for me is a huge part of it, of like, she went on to really fight for reproductive rights.
Yeah.
And in conversation with how she came to be, like literally, she was literally stripped away of reproductive rights.
Yeah.
And so that for me is like the biggest loss that the movie has.
Yes, I agree. I love that, you know, it ends with her with Toinette and she doesn't seem to have settled for Max, which would feel different than it does in the book. If we can't have Bella asking us if we really believe that the narrative we just watched is more likely than her being a self-made woman in the Victorian era, I would at least like to know that her adventures continue, you know? Like, what was the Alexandria sequence in the film for? If we're just gonna end with Bella literally in a walled garden, sipping cocktails being served by, you know, another version of herself.
Yeah.
It feels antithetical. And that's my biggest beef with the film. Like, it's not even that I needed to see the Victoria letter adapted clearly, so much as I want to see Bella's growth continue.
I think if you took it in the most cynical way possible, you could say she became the villain.
Yeah, which I hate.
I know you hate, because it's like the witch.
Yeah, it's just like why? What meaning does that, like, what purpose does that serve in the narrative? It's kind of a boring ending to me.
Yes. And I think that's why it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately kind of what, like, if we're, I guess the movie doesn't want us to look at Baxter as like a bad guy.
Yeah.
The movie, though.
The ending of the movie is very fuck you, got mine, which is antithetical to the idea of socialism.
Yeah.
And if the movie is not on board with the idea of socialism, then what is the Alexandria sequence for? Like, what function does it serve? And the answer is it doesn't.
Yeah.
Like, it makes, the ending makes that section feel pointless.
Well, it very much feels like Barbie when Barbie takes back over Barbie Land, and then it's kind of like, well, what are the men going to do? It doesn't really matter, right?
This ain't about them.
This isn't about them. And like, that.
It's antithetical to what, like, the point.
For the both of us, it left a bad taste in your mouth. You're like, but where are they going to sleep? So,
again, I love the movie Poor Things. I think it's great. I do think it is a poor adaptation.
But it is great.
But it is great. Something can be good and also not a good adaptation.
I will be saying to other people, oh, you need to watch this movie.
Yeah. And you got to read the book, too. The book fucking rules. The book's so good. Do you have anything else to say about Poor Things?
No, I think you should read Echo Wife.
I will.
As I'm reading through this, I was like, oh, man, I kind of wish we would have watched or read
Echo Wife
in like conversation with this, because I feel like it has the other side.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Maybe I'll read it if I can get it when I'm on vacation. I can read it and we could do a bonus episode.
Oh, that would be so exciting.
Poor Things. I love it. I legitimately
wasn't a poor movie.
It was not a poor movie. It's really good. I highly recommend the book. I'm really, really, really excited to read more Alasdair Gray.
Tell me if there's anything that you think I'd like.
Yeah, I loved this book. I love the way it was written. That section that I read about like Bella's ideas about God is the kind of writing that just like fills me with joy.
Yeah.
Like it's weird and strange and challenging and beautiful. Which is my favorite kind of writing. I wish I was more like that. But we can't all be Alasdair Gray.
No.
So that's it for this episode.
All right.
You can find us online at fakegeekgirlscast.com, which has all of our previous episodes. As mentioned, if you are interested in anything we talked about in this episode, check out the Magic Mike XXL episode. I know that's crazy to say. You'll understand. The Shrek episode. I know that's crazy to say. You'll get it.
I think it's less crazy.
Yeah. I mentioned another one. Barbie and Ken. And there's one more. Oh, Children of Men.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to hear a bit more about adaptation. Consider supporting us on Patreon. There's a link in the show notes. $1 a month is cool. You can get our bonus episodes. I found a few that I hadn't uploaded, so a few have been up recently. The thing about bimbo feminism actually is in a bonus episode. I cut it out of the Barbie episode because I was getting a little too heated. So if you want to listen to the bonus
Missy
episode,
too felt it was too spicy for the public.
I felt it was too spicy for the public.
And I'm like, spice it up.
Yeah, I hear you. But
not everybody wants to engage with media the way we do.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where like I think we were coming from a different place, and like you have to pay to hear Mary and I disagree.
We did, though. We did disagree.
We did disagree. It's fine. We don't have to agree about everything.
In fact, we shouldn't.
No. Next time we're going to be talking about Over the Garden Wall. Now, here's the thing. We are going to do our fucking best to get this out in a time like in Over the Garden Wall season.
Is it still available to stream?
Yeah, it's on Hulu.
It was on Max.
Yeah, it's on Hulu.
Okay.
We have to record this when we're at Geek Girl Con.
We do?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking on Saturday because it's Sunday is our live. Also, we're doing a live Let's Play. So we're going to try to get it out in time. We had a bit of a delay for many reasons. So we're going to try to get it out by the end of November. I'm also going on vacation to Japan, which also makes things a little bit difficult. But we're going to try. We're going to try, everybody. If you're like, hey, this isn't Over the Garden Wall season anymore, then you know what? Just don't listen to it and save it till next November.
Just get out your Halloween stuff, put it around you.
Yeah. And you'll be fine.
Yeah. Don't take your Halloween decorations down until you listen to it.
Never take your Halloween decorations down. After that, we're going to be doing Kill Bill, voted on by our patrons. Thank you. And then after Kill Bill, we're going to be doing Howl's Moving Castle.
Oh, yay!
Hell yeah. So we're going to do for Howl's Moving Castle, we're going to do the movie. And then do you want to do I would like to do all 3 books personally.
I mean, how long are they?
They're not long. They're middle grade books. Oh, Mary, I cannot wait.
To him.
I cannot wait for you to meet Book Howl. I cannot wait for you to see Howl and Sophie's relationship. Two of my favorite characters in media. So that's time for more Diana Wynne Jones for you. That's Crestomancy. You really liked Crestomancy, right?
Yeah, I liked it. I liked the girl more.
The girl.
I liked her story of the young girl that we read, Alana.
Oh, that was Tamara Pierce.
That's
different
Tamara
author.
Pierce. That's Tamara Pierce.
So I'm very excited about all of those. I haven't watched Kill Bill since high school.
I've never watched it.
Really? Never? I thought we watched it together.
If we did, I don't remember.
Well, it was in high school, so. So that's it. Thanks for joining us.
Catch you on the flip side.